Midway through the 2011 season, Texas Tech entered their ball game in Norman against the #1 team in the BCS, the Oklahoma Sooners, as a 4-touchdown underdog. I don't know anybody at all who gave Texas Tech a chance to win that game. Texas Tech jumped all over OU early and was able to hold on in the end for an improbable 41-38 win, and it was the biggest upset in the country in all of 2011. At that point, you thought Tommy Tuberville finally had things figured out at Texas Tech. They were 5-2 in the thick of the Big 12 race and were ranked 20th in the country. So certainly the following week, a game against Iowa State, a team that Tech was expected to win in Lubbock against the Cyclones, wouldn't be much of a problem. But who would have known that that Oklahoma victory was the last time Tech would win for the entire season? Because the next 5 games if Tech, you get the feeling that they pull another 5-7 or a 6-6, if Tech cannot win at least 7 regular season games, I think Tommy Tuberville is going to be gone. I think when they hired Tuberville, they probably didn't expect Big 12 championships, at least not right away. But I think they expected, 8-win seasons at least. And if you're looking at Tech the last couple of years, they have not even reached that level. So this is a very big year for them. I think injuries will play a part of it, just like it does for every team. But you're looking for big-time improvement as far as the defense, which we'll get into later. The heat is on Tommy Tuberville, in my opinion. Well, they at least don't have to worry about the quarterback situation. That's a heatless area because Seth Doege is a good one. And Seth would probably get a lot more mention as far as how good of a quarterback he is if it weren't for the Big 12, because the Big 12 already has terrific quarterbacks. Colin Klein of Kansas State, Casey Paha of TCU, and of course Landry Jones at OU, and at West Virginia, you've got Geno Smith. Doege last season threw for over 4,000 yards, had 28 touchdowns, and it'll help that he has a lot of wide receivers coming back. The Red Raiders will always be known as a pass-first offense. It's just that simple. The way they move the ball, you can see why. Looking at the receivers for the Red Raiders, Alex Torres, he has played there since his freshman year. And he'll be back for his senior year. He's a guy, not very big, but he definitely can move with the ball once he catches it. He loves the slant patterns. Now, Eric Ward, isn't quite the same receiver as Torres, but he's bigger and he's definitely harder to tackle upper body-wise. He's got bulk for a wide receiver. So Ward comes back, and Darren Moore, we'll have to see how he does. Last year, he had injuries, so we'll see if he's fully recovered. And Javon Bell, he's a junior college transfer. He should fit right into the mix for Tech. The health of the Texas Tech running backs. This is a big area because last year, if you watch Texas Tech football, you noticed that much of the second half of the season, they didn't have a running attack, at least not a very good one. Beginning of the year, that wasn't the case because Eric Stevens was not only playing well, but he was leading the Big 12 in rushing, and he was actually the second leading rusher in the country. And then either the 5th or 6th game of the year, I think it was the 5th game of the year when they played Texas A&M, that's when Stevens suffered a major injury. ACL as well as MCL injury, got shut down for the rest of the year. Should be back this season, but really watch to see how much of that knee will be a factor. I don't know if he's going to be the same running back, but when he was in his prime, he was pretty hard to stop. But he's not the only running back that has to worry about injuries because DeAndre Washington, another expected returning starter, he had an ACL injury a year ago as well. You can have a pretty good offensive line and a good passing game, but if you don't have healthy running backs, how can you be effective on the ground? And last season, both Stevens and Washington were slowed down because of the injuries. In the case of Stevens, of course, 2 major injuries to the knee, the MCL and the ACL. So don't be surprised if Kenny Williams gets called on quite a bit to help out the Tech ground game. You got 3 running backs there that I think you can rely on if you're Texas Tech. That is, if the injuries don't come back into play again for Stevens as well as for Washington. So that's a big area to watch out for Texas Tech. Offensive line, they do have some veterans coming back, including a preseason All-Big 12 selection in LaAdrian Waddle from the left tackle spot, and also DeVary Gallington from his center position returns for the Red Raiders. Terry McDaniel saw some action a year ago. He'll be at right guard. He's a senior. And then the other two areas for the Red Raiders up front, they're not as experienced in. In fact, left guard is Bo Carpenter. He's a sophomore. And then a redshirt freshman will start at the right tackle position in LaRaven Clark. So that's your Texas Tech offensive line. They've been serviceable, but the big thing for them is going to be run blocking, because last season, big reason why Red Raiders went into a slide at the end was because they didn't have much of a ground attack. So that has to improve, and of course the health of those running backs will be something to watch out for. Look, there's no need for me to sugarcoat this area at all for the Red Raiders. They were flat out horrible last year on defense. How bad? How about worst rush defense in the country out of 120 teams? Overall D wasn't much better for the Red Raiders either. 7th worst overall. I was, in a way, hoping that the defensive experiments with Chad Glasgow worked out. You might have heard me talk in the past that Chad and I both played at Woodward High. We were teammates at Woodward High School back in the late 80s. So part of me felt bad that the 4-2-5 defense just wasn't compatible at all for the Red Raiders. Glasgow is now back at TCU as a secondary coach under Gary Patterson. So now enter the 4th different defensive coordinator for the Red Raiders in 4 seasons, Art Kaufman. And you got it, they're not going to be running the 4-2-5 anymore. They're going to a 4-3 defense, and maybe that will simplify things a little bit for a Red Raider D that needs all the help they can get. 2 reasons why I think the Red Raider defense will be a little better than last year. Reason number 1, they can't be any worse. You just heard me describe statistically where they were a year ago. But number 2, they've got a lot of experience back. And let's talk about the defensive ends. Talk about Darchwan Bush at one defensive end. Another defensive end that doesn't have the experience that Bush has, and that's going to be Brandon Jackson. He is a redshirt freshman. They got to get better play from those 2 guys. We'll see how this front 4 does. That's going to be the biggest key to everything, because if they can show even the slightest bit of improvement against the ground game, then that should help the back 2 lines out, the linebackers and the secondary. Speaking of the linebackers, a little bit better in this department. That's because of Terrence Bullitt. He's a fine player. He returns along with Will Smith, not to be confused with the Fresh Prince, but Will Smith, and another linebacker along with the 3rd linebacker that they'll use, which will be Sam E. Galvin. So that will be pretty big as well if those 3 guys can really step it up. The safeties for Texas Tech, I don't think there's too many things wrong with them, especially Cody Davis, who's a hard hitter, terrific tackler. He comes back, and then the other safety, pretty reliable guy, they hope in Lubbock, will be DJ Johnson. The corners, though, that's an area where the Red Raiders constantly got picked on in 2011. So terrific play from Cornelius Douglas, as well as Eugene Nebo will help out big time. Texas Tech, again, defensively, they're never going to be known as juggernauts. Part of it's not their fault. The offense sometimes doesn't take long in Lubbock to score. Last year, I think the Red Raiders averaged 28 minutes of time of possession. I can't remember the last time Texas Tech defense was not on the field as long as the offense. Last year, the Red Raider defense was on the field about 32 minutes per ball game. So it does take more energy, especially as the game progresses, to play defense than it does offense, because of the energy you're compounding, plus the fact that you're anticipating where the play is going to go. So playing defense, to me, I think requires more than offense. And when your defense is on the field longer than the offense, that part doesn't help. So I do sympathize with Tech in that regard. But having said that, though, last season they just didn't seem to be as aggressive on the defensive side, and they seemed to give up a lot of big plays. The second half of the season, it didn't seem like they could stop anybody. So the defense for Texas Tech, this will be the biggest area, in my opinion, between Tech getting back to a bowl game and them having another losing season. Looking at the special teams for the Red Raiders, mixed reviews in my opinion as far as the kicking duties. One hand, Donnie Corona Their veteran place kicker, he's moved on. So now stepping in will be a new guy. That will be Ryan Buston. And then the punting situation, this area doesn't look as much of a concern because they have experience coming back in the form of Ryan Erksleben, who last season was reliable, averaging a little more than 41 yards per punt. Now, as far as the return game goes, Ben McCroy did a decent job last season as far as returning kicks. And as far as the punt returner, it looks like that'll be Austin Zuzelik who will handle that job. The Red Raiders, though, need to do a better job as far as containing kicks. You might remember that game against Kansas State last season was one that they could have won, but the special teams really let them down. I think they had a couple of kicks blocked, one that got returned for a touchdown, and that to me made a big, big difference, and that could have been that sixth victory that eluded the Red Raiders and could have got them to another bowl game. But special teams really costed them against the Wildcats last year. Northwestern State at Texas State and New Mexico. That right there is cheesecake, big time, 3-0. If it's not, then they might just fire Tommy Tuberville on the spot. A little kidding in a way about that, but they'll be pretty upset if they can't win all three of those games because those are gimmies. You play at Iowa State following a bye week. That'll be the Big 12 opener in Ames. A must-win for Texas Tech. You lose that one, then your chances of going to a bowl game really decrease just like that because of the fact of that's right, Red October. 4 difficult Red Raider games in this particular month. I don't see the Red Raiders being a favorite in any of them. Early October, a home game against Oklahoma. They've had success against the Sooners, winning 3 of the last 5, but you know OU's going to be extremely pumped up after what happened to them last year in Norman. The following week, you host Geno Smith and that electrifying West Virginia offense. I foresee that one being a high-scoring game. Take the over, whatever the over-under is for that particular game. Then the next 2 games are on the road, both toughies, at TCU and at Kansas State. And by the way, early November, you host Texas. That's 5 potential losses right there. So that's why Tech has to get off to that 4-0 start before they hit October. The last 3 games, home against Kansas should be a win. The 17th, they go to Oklahoma State, probably will be a loss. And then the 24th, you play in Arlington at Cowboy Stadium against Baylor in a game that could determine if Tech can get to that necessary 6-win total. My final assessment of Texas Tech, I still think defensively they're going to struggle until it's proven to me otherwise. Offensively, passing game is still going to be electrifying. They'll still put up a lot of yardage, and they'll still put up points. The running game, have to see what the health of Stevens and what the health of Washington will be throughout the season after recovering from significant injuries in 2011. Texas Tech will take, but they'll also give in terms of the scoreboard, and therefore I think they're going to be flirting with 500. I think they just barely, and I mean barely, get to 6 wins and get to a bowl game and finish with a 6-6 record. But I don't know if that's going to be enough to keep Tech fans satisfied and keep the higher ups at Texas Tech satisfied for Tuberville to be back in 2013. It'll definitely be a wait-and-see type game. But I see Texas Tech finishing 7th in the Big 12 and 6-6 overall and just barely qualifying for postseason play. That does it for my look at the Red Raiders of Texas Tech. We'll head to Stillwater for my next show as we'll talk about the Oklahoma State Cowboys, the defending Big 12 champions. See you next time.